Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today's webinar, Best Practices for Privileged Access Based on Zero Trust Principles. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to cover just a couple of housekeeping items.
Hi, this is Harry.
First off, thank you so much. First off, we understand schedules are busy, especially with everything going on in the world today, so we appreciate you giving us your time. If you're wondering who I am, my name is Karen, and I run Centrify's East Coast and Canadian region field events, and I'll be your guide for today's webinar. Now, off to those housekeeping items. First thing, today's webinar is being recorded, so you can access the on-demand version about 48 hours post-event using the same link you used to log in today. We hope you have a chance to revisit the content and share with your colleagues. Second, we also invite your comments and questions. You can leave your comments or questions in the Q&A pop-out box, which can be located by clicking the Q&A icon found at the bottom of the control panel of this webinar. Please chat with us there throughout the webinar, and we'll try to answer it then, or we'll ask our speakers when they conclude their presentations. Third, if you would like to get in contact with Centrify or IAMConcepts, you can connect with our speakers directly using the About Speakers icon at the bottom of the webinar console. Once you click on it, both speakers will pop up, and a mail icon is located below each speaker. Fourth, there's a resource list icon on the bottom of the console as well. Here you'll find some great resources which can also be revisited when the webinar is available on demand. Finally, just a quick idea of the structure of this webinar. There'll be 3 portions. First portion, you'll hear from Centrify's cybersecurity evangelist, Dr. Torsten George. The second portion, you'll hear from Harry Takal, Managing Director at IAMConcepts. And then the final portion will be an open Q&A session where we'd love for the audience to ask any questions that they might have. And just remember to submit your questions through that Q&A icon. All right, now that we've covered all the bases, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Torsten George. Dr. Torsten George is a cybersecurity evangelist at Centrify, which delivers identity-centric PAM solutions to secure modern enterprises and stop the leading cause of breaches, privileged access abuse. He also serves as the strategic advisory board member at vulnerability risk management software vendor Knapsack. He is internationally recognized IT security expert, author, and speaker. Dr. George has been a part of the global IT security community for more than 25 years and regularly provides commentary and publishes articles on data breaches, insider threats, cyber warfare, incident response, and IT security best practices. Torsten is also the co-author of Zero Trust Privilege for Dummies book. Now that you have a sense for who your first speaker is, I would like to welcome up to the virtual stage Dr. Torsten George. Torsten, over to you.
Thank you, Karen. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. So today we will talk about Discover Identity-Centric PAM to enable cloud transformation. As we're all aware, organizations are increasingly moving their workloads to the cloud to really achieve greater agility, flexibility, and cost savings. And this holds especially true during these unprecedented times that we're facing, where really these factors have become vital to many businesses and their survival. In turn, spending on cloud infrastructure services is really projected to grow from an currently estimated $50 billion to $74.1 billion through 2022, according to Gartner. According to the shared security model for public cloud applications, enterprises are always responsible for securing identities and data, but a recent IDC survey found that the scale and the complexity of IaaS and PaaS environments make it really nearly impossible to understand access-related risk, let alone enforce least privilege across really the multitude of users and applications and resources. So over the next 20 minutes, I want to introduce you to an identity-centric approach to privileged access management that really will allow you to address these challenges. So let's kind of look at how you stack up to the cloud transformation movement. According to the 2020 Cloud Threat Report that was conducted by Oracle and KPMG, 88% of organizations are currently using public cloud infrastructure in one way or another. Some companies might have not fully moved in there, but maybe some of their departments, like DevOps. And as I mentioned earlier, adoption is definitely primarily driven by agility, flexibility, and cost savings. However, there really remain major concerns about cloud adoption that are deeply rooted in security challenges. And in fact, 92% of organizations really admit that they face a cloud security readiness gap. And that's probably why you joined us here today, to kind of find out, how can I close my readiness gap? How can I really be prepared? And it's important to look at this because there's no way avoiding moving workloads into the cloud. If it's not today, you have to be prepared to respond to your CIO's mandate for cloud transformation really soon. I mean, I talk with our field personnel quite a bit, and one of our top sellers, he told me a story where he was engaged with a client, and he got told, hey, we don't need anything for the cloud. We're not doing anything in the cloud. But then 2 weeks later, he got the call, and especially currently under the current conditions, things change very quickly. And so the CIO had mandated to really move as quickly as possible to the cloud, and certainly IT and security professionals within the organization had to struggle to figure out how they do that in a secure fashion. So Gartner really foresees that those organizations that are not jumping on the cloud transformation bandwagon will lag behind as it relates to cost optimization, competitive, and therefore even might take a hit when it comes to business valuation. So we touched upon it a little bit earlier, inhibitors. What's holding us back to really adopt this, fully embrace it? It's really security concerns, and you might ask yourself, are these concerns really justified? I would say not necessarily, but obviously when you transition to the cloud, everyone involved must understand that cloud security is really a shared responsibility between the cloud service provider and the customer. And quite frankly, it doesn't matter if you go with AWS, with Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, or any other cloud service provider. The same concept applies. Here I use the example of AWS as the cloud service provider, and so it's the cloud service provider typically takes care of securing the core infrastructure and the services as part of their responsibilities. However, securing the operating systems, the platforms, and the data really remains the responsibility of customers. And there's still a myth around that. We have done some surveys, and more than 60% of people, quite frankly, believe that everything is handled by the cloud service provider. So you really have to remember that shared responsibility model, because otherwise you're quite likely to be exposed to cyber attacks. Cyber attackers take advantage of that. And in this context, talking about cyber attackers, it's important to understand that it takes only one compromised privileged credential to impact millions. When I talk about millions, I'm talking about millions of data records, millions in damages that you suffer, millions in fines that you might have to pay. So it has a major impact. And research really shows that 79% of companies experience at least one cloud data breach in the past 18 months. And 43% said that they had 10 or more. That's a stunning number. The top 3 cloud security threats are security misconfiguration of their production environments, the lack of visibility into access in production environment, who is really accessing this, and then really improper identity and access management permission configurations. And a good example for the latter was the cyber attack on OneLogin. In this case, an attacker obtained and used highly sensitive keys for the vendor's Amazon-hosted cloud instance from an intermediate host. And so they effectively broke into the service using the front door keys. It's embarrassing, but it happens a lot. And this is just one out of many examples of breaches that are nowadays really targeting cloud environments. And we have seen that. At Tesla, something similar happened. Attackers took over the environment and installed their crypto mining software there. So it's very, very common. So now, obviously, to limit their exposure to these attacks, organizations like yours need to rethink your enterprise security strategy and really move to an identity-centric approach based on zero trust model, which really the mantra is never trust, always verify, enforce least privilege. And this concept should be implemented within an organization's workforce, as well as your partners, your privileged IT admins, and your outsourced IT. And so when it comes to your cloud environment, there are kind of 6 best practices that should be considered, especially to avoid today's #1 cause of breaches, which is privileged access abuse. So you should apply a common security model across your entire infrastructure. You should consolidate identities. You should ensure accountability, apply least privilege and privilege elevation, audit everything, and finally use multi-factor authentication. So when we look at the common security model, and when it comes to cloud adoption, we heard about it. It's a lot of time is that myth, we have to treat the cloud differently than on our on-premises systems. But why would you need to treat a cloud service managed environment any different than your own data center? The roles and responsibilities are still the same for your users. And therefore, you should leverage what you already got for a common security infrastructure spanning on-premises and cloud resources. Just extend it into the cloud. The second thing is really that you should avoid any additional silos of identity that only expand your attack surface, even increase your overhead and lead to identity sprawl. So instead of local cloud provider IAM accounts and access keys, you should use centralized identities. If you currently use LDAP or Active Directory, you should leverage that and just federate into these cloud environments. The other thing is, obviously, you want to ensure accountability. If I use an AWS EC2 user or an administrator root account, these are shared privileges. They're anonymous. I wouldn't know who really logs in, but I, even for governance and compliance purposes, want to have 100% accountability. I want to know who is really logging in. And again, you could leverage your existing enterprise directory to do the mapping to the roles and groups that the cloud provider has mapped into their roles. The other thing is really granting just enough privilege to complete the task at hand in the cloud provider management console, in the service itself, or if you touch the cloud provider instances. You should implement really something that you should also do in your on-premises environment, and really have zero standing privileges, and if somebody needs to do a task, elevate these privileges when it's needed, and only for the time that it's needed. The other thing is really, as we are all needing to abide by regulations, to lock and monitor both authorized and unauthorized user sessions to cloud provider instances, and really associate all the activity to an individual and report on both the privilege activity and access rights. And then always good, it's kind of low-hanging fruit, is applying multi-factor authentication. Because even if somebody compromised your credentials, they most likely will not have the second factor that you're holding at your fingertips. So these are really kind of the best practices. Now you might say, hey, so how are these best practices really applicable to my day-to-day cloud operations? Well, obviously, there are two use cases where you should apply them. One is really securing access to the cloud service management. That's the console that where you manage your user credentials, you starting setting up your environment. That's basically the crown jewels that attackers are often after. So you want to vault away the root user credentials. You want to really do identity federation. You would want to apply just enough privilege and elevated privilege needed if you want to access that console. The other use case is really once you're set up and you're running, obviously you have team members that touch the cloud instances, that touch the containers, and you want to make sure that those people are legit, that the right people are doing this. And so there are different options at your fingertips that you can apply here. I called them homegrown hack, on-premises vault, identity-centric PAM. So when I talk about homegrown hack, what do I mean? I mean, obviously, I can start replicating my existing enterprise directory in the cloud. All cloud service providers offer me cloud directories. I can set that up. But I'm duplicating things. And by doing so, in reality, I'm expanding my attack surface, and also to potentially sync with my headquarter enterprise directory, I might need to establish site-to-site VPN, which is quite expensive. And so there are a lot of drawbacks related to cost. A lot of cloud service providers might say, hey, we have all these free tools. And that's great if you bound to that cloud service provider for the next 100 years, that's great. But most of organizations have multiple cloud service providers, so it becomes quite tricky. Now you have to have people that have knowledge about these tools. So that's a required headcount cost. You have to train them. You have to keep them up to date. And maintaining these duplicated identity silos is quite tricky, quite cumbersome, and really creates an unnecessary security risk. So obviously you can take a next step on the security maturity level, and you can start deploying on-premises password vaults to really vault away these local admin accounts and secrets. And here again, I mean, this is not coming from us. It's Gartner's viewpoint that these on-premises vaults are quite resource hungry and could potentially create some bottlenecks, especially as it comes to latency. And I'm just voting away things. I'm not taking it completely out of the equation. So there's still a risk that remains. The third step, obviously, let's take a look at the architecture here also. These are on-premises vaults. So for each different cloud that I'm operating in, I would have to set up another vault. And that's a lot of effort. That's a lot of work, and it still doesn't apply any MFA to it. I still would VPN into these environments, and VPN is not the safest either. It's better than nothing, but it's not the safest. And so the last option is really leveraging a cloud-native identity-centric PAM service, and here you would really have the least expensive approach. You would take advantage of multi-tenant architecture, full scalability, both horizontal and vertically, and then because you're federating, you're not kind of creating identity silos, you're not using VPN, but you're federating, leveraging your existing IAM infrastructure, you're really applying zero trust best practices and really can minimize your exposure to privileged access abuse. And how does that look like? I mean, nothing has changed. You're still dealing with multiple cloud environments. But in reality, now you have a single vault, a single repository of all your passwords and secrets. And from there, you can access your on-premise environment. You can access your DMZ environment. You can access all the different cloud environments. So it's a very scalable, very simplistic solution. And once you establish that, you can really fully apply an identity-centric approach that is based on zero trust principles, which really means that you're enrolling the system or your instance in the cloud into your authoritative source, And by doing so, you're establishing a root of trust. And you're leveraging now that root of trust. You can delegate that trust relationship to any application, any service that resides on that machine to really verify that who is doing what, who is trying to gain access, and verifying who doesn't necessarily be limited nowadays to just a human. It can also be a machine. It can be a service. You then contextualize the request. You look at, hey, somebody tries to gain access to a database. Is there a trouble ticket associated with it that really requires that access request? You also want to take into account that you want to do things securely, meaning not necessarily being network attached, for instance, via VPN, and therefore having a chance to spread malicious software, but rather really apply the concept of a clean source and create a secure admin environment where you use a jump host to directly go into your target system and not into a network segment. And then we talked about it, applying least privilege, just in time, just enough. Then audit and anything and adjusting your controls with the help of machine learning technology to really take away the burden of IT managers having to adjust otherwise static controls. And so by leveraging this approach, you can gain tremendous benefits. And in reality, you can treat the cloud as it would be your own data center. So there's no difference for you. It makes your life far easier, and we have seen that for many of our clients. So with that, I thank you for taking the time. I know we will move on to Harry next.
All right, thank you so much, Torsten. What great insights on boosting cloud security confidence with Zero Trust. Next up, I would like to introduce our final speaker, Harry Takal, Managing Director at IAMConcepts Security Solutions. Harry Takal is the Managing Director and Privileged Access Management Lead at IAMConcepts Security Solutions, an industry leader in identity and access management with clients across Canada, the U.S., and Europe. Harry is an experienced senior identity and access management consultant, specializing in privileged account management solutions with over 15 years of professional experience in top financial institutions and various IT domains. He is well recognized for his expertise in technical and implementational achievements through a variety of enterprise IAM engagements, leading strategy, architecture, planning, designing, and implementation of IAMConcepts solutions to meet diverse business and client requirements. All right, Harry, it's your turn at the virtual stage. Over to you now.
Great. Great. Thank you, Karen. I appreciate the elaborate introduction. Thank you all, and thanks for attending this webinar. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about building a successful privileged access management strategy. So on the docket for the agenda for today, we'll talk a little bit about cyber attack overview, the 5 W's as we like to call it, secrets, vaulting, automation secrets management, some information around privileged account and session management, as Torsten did mention in his slides as well. We'll go over a little bit about the analytics of privilege, the remote access portion, which is a brand new kind of sector that's kind of come up as use cases are circling around vendor access and remote connectivity for PAM use cases when securing your environment. We'll touch base about adoption and the growth beyond a password vault, and a little bit about the industry vision that's moving forward in 2020 and beyond. So both industry leaders, Forrester and Gartner, have placed privileged access management as a top priority for CISOs almost across every industry on the planet these days. PAM protects a unique digital identities that, if stolen, can bring entire companies and businesses to a halt. targeting attacks are becoming more prevalent as time goes on, right? A target attack typically characterized as, something that's specific to an organization or an employee. Phishing or spear phishing are included in those type of attacks, targeted to infiltrate certain network segments and steal very sensitive data, and or just to cripple a business itself and cause business disruptions. And the general premise of an attack is for the attacker to maintain undetected throughout the attack lifecycle, and then still maintain integral in a sense where they don't want to actually leave the environment that they're actually doing reconnaissance around. They want to stay very invested into that company, and they want to maintain undetected as long as possible. So the 5 Ws. So target attacks are becoming, since target attacks are becoming more prevalent, when we look at what we're trying to actually manage, we're trying to actually solve the secrets problem. So when we think about securing privileged accounts, we dawn upon the same questions around the secrets, and we refer to those things which are considered the 5 Ws. And these were like early childhood kind of troubleshooting techniques that we used to use, which are, what, where, why, and how, and who. So typically when we look at secrets, we resonate that across, and we resonate those questions across, and we always ask us those same questions, where we want to have a firm grasp on who is accessing what credential, from what system, from where, and why. And that's typically a mainstay when it comes time to protecting identities. And this is where a strong PAM solution comes into play. So when we talk about secrets management, that's the problem that PAM is trying to solve, right? Secrets are defined as, sets of credentials that can be classified, anything that grants you authorization or authentication to a system, right? And some examples of secrets that reside in typical infrastructures and environments are usernames and passwords, your database credentials, API tokens, certificates, SSH keys, cloud services as well, and then you have your source code and your static config files that are also a part of your secrets management platform. And because these secrets are so widely spread, they're very hard to manage and attest their validity. And that's where strong vaulting and vaulting concepts kind of come into play, right? So when we speak about vaulting, the vault is essentially a centralized location where you store secrets, and that's where your fundamental functionalities when using vaulting concepts come into play. And some of them are data stored within a vault will be encrypted. Well, it should be encrypted since it's a digital vault and you're using it for security, right? But it's both encrypted at rest and in transit between the vault and its components, so it's very secure. Hence why it's a mainstay. It's sort of like a hub and spoke architecture if you think of how the vault relates to all its components. Vault allows us the ability to do some detailed access control modeling. This allows us to give more even fine-grained access and remove those static accounts that have access to multiple systems across, and give that more granularity for both human and machine-based accounts. The auditing portion allows us to provide evidence and attestation for both human and non-human accounts and entities that were normally not easily to report on and attain in a typical environment that doesn't have a solid PAM program. It also allows you to move away from shared secrets and target machines to move to a finer grained policy, which thus reduces the attack surface as mentioned before, and the integration of multi-factor. In addition to this, additional capabilities that are sort of spawned off the vaulting principles are like secrets management, right? So policies that maintain secrets by modifying them, like ad hoc or on a scheduled basis, by triggers. These are your password changer type of roles. Then you have like privileged session isolation, which refers to like Torsten mentioned, like a jump server, bastion, or a proxy that allows you to isolate and audit, record and monitor sessions. Hard-coded credential removal, which by removing credentials in like flat files, script files, based on REST API calls, based on SOAP calls, procedure calls. Managing those kind of hard-coded credentials really reduces the attack surface, and that's another sort of capability that spawned off the Vault principles. Intelligent analytics, which provides insight into your PAM solution in a way of like graphs, statistics. It gives you utilization, threat vectors, and also can trigger policy-based actions as well, like email alerting, maybe some sort of workflow type of activities can also occur, right? And then last is enabling least privilege, right? So this concept is the practices of restricting access for secrets to the minimum viable amount or quantity that's absolutely required to perform the legitimate activity for the system or for the system. So moving ahead, computers contain a lot of sensitive data and critical information. So keeping that is, it's a mainstay for all systems. So the main strategy around maintaining these secrets is not unlike methods that we used before, like change your password every 30 days when prompted, right? Essentially, what secrets management is doing is sort of automating that portion of that control. Changing the passwords more frequently or more often after every use has great benefits. It reduces your attack vector. It also limits multiple account breaches. If we take things back to, how we typically do things is, everyone kind of uses the same password across multiple systems or very small iterations of it across, right? So it's easier to remember one password than multiple. So from our experience, the same password more often than not is used, and that's why it's across more endpoints usually, and that's why there's a heightened risk and increase there. So going more granular, separating that model will shorten the half-life of passwords. It'll make bad actors, trying to infiltrate and get into your environment. It'll make that more difficult for them, and it'll provide that attestation that's necessary. Now, securing privileged access, via like a bastion or a proxy have been excellent strategies when trying to thwart network attacks and infections, right? Session management and proxying, they provide network separation as well, right? That's needed to keep segregation between environments and also bridge the gap in cases, right? And additional benefits that this technology brings is, they give you the monitoring capabilities. They also, in certain cases, will give you keystroke and logging information as well, right? The main strategic benefit of deploying a session management technology is to reduce and mitigate the risk at the same time enhance your posture. And this is by preventing the spread of malware, by leveraging the proxy type of architecture, which was just mentioned, which protects your endpoints as well. And then monitoring access and malicious activity, which will provide dashboard insights on third parties, report them, and as well give you some graphical inputs and interfaces for your tools and analyzation reporting edge. So if we touch on the analytics, finding new great ways to gain business intelligence from the PAM program has always been, a very needed requirement, right? As organizations are increasingly expanding their strategy and they're growing beyond the typical norms and adopting more and more accounts and expanding their PAM program into, cloud, DevOps methodologies, this also increases the attack surface. So analytics is a much needed tool to provide insights and overview of the solution and its components. It provides a lot. And even much more than just user and accounts. Additionally, analytics also provides, very in-depth reporting. It does provide machine learning, which leverages user behavioral analytics, maps out trends. It secures data, providing alerting, and in case automated actions can be taken, as mentioned before, right? You get that enhanced auditing, which is centralized to investigate, risk-based recordings, keystrokes, and commands. There's also a data collection portion of it where it can integrate with your SIEM and your enterprise-level tools to provide even more stringent reporting. So the remote access, which was mentioned in the earlier deck, provide your administrators and teams, outsourced IT and third-party vendors with access to your infrastructure. Typically now moving forward into 2020s and beyond, and as we can take note with the recent changes in the world right now with COVID and a few other things that are happening, working remotely is now it's a requirement basically for almost every organization, right? So securing privilege around that remote access and making it easier for people to work from home and users to actually gain access to network and resources is a mainstay now in the cybersecurity community, because we have to protect those assets as well, right? So privileged remote access service really it provides the on-premise and cloud-based access to your environment, right? The ability to work from home with the same security controls and principles applied, enabling connectivity to remote vendors without the need for VPN-type access, because administratively that becomes a very daunting task for organizations, is to provision and deprovision users for short-lived periods of time, right? Enable access to data centers and cloud infrastructure, and it's all multi-factored throughout that whole life cycle. And enabling users in remote access at the need of Active Directory. So if we talk a little bit about adoption and beyond the vault, as we continue the journey moving forward to a mature PAM program, by further integrating different modules and technologies, we also need to define a new and existing business processes to kind of complete the entire circle. So in every industry, in almost every business, this is why IAMConcepts believes that privilege access management is essential for every business, but also understands the strategies around driving cultural change within your organization to drive adoption. Right. The cultural fit at heart is any modern day PAM solution needs to be it needs to be around business culture. And around organizational change management, right? This will enable organizations to become better adopters of the security programs like PAM and privilege access, and then that'll kind of be instrumental in driving transformation within their organization, because it's a life cycle product. It's not just a solution itself, right? And then the strategy and risk portion. Industries are now realizing that the importance of PAM, and it needs to align with your cybersecurity program as it relates to IT, as well as it has to be instrumental with aligning with your risk strategies as well. And it has to be, both those things have to be kind of commensurate to the level of risk you're trying to protect within your organization. And just a last note, this is what, it's a personal note, this is sort of what I believe is, privilege access is not technology or security problem, it's in fact a business problem. And a little vision for 2020 and beyond. So according to Gartner's Magic Quadrant, when it relates to what's going to happen, I guess, between now and 2024, they believe 50% of the implementations that are going through a PAM program right now are going to be implementing a just-in-time provisioning model. I think that's an excellent number, and we can already see as industries are moving forward and our customers are moving forward with just-in-time provisioning, that we have seen a big change in that, and that will lead to experiencing fewer breaches. 80% is what they're marking, as well as the same time during that time span, 65% of organizations will start to use more automated type of tools and features to automate and streamline their IT resources and cut staffing costs. And that in turn will drive down attack vectors, and which will reduce your breaches. And they're guesstimating that's going to be about 70%. So I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'd like to pass it back over to Karen and field any questions you folks would have.
Great. Thank you so much, Harry. What a great session on building successful PAM security strategies. Now that we've heard from both of our speakers, I'd love to open it up to the audience for a live Q&A time. So just remember, you can submit your questions using that Q&A button icon that's found at the bottom of your console in this webinar. Okay, let's see. What's the first question here? Okay. You mentioned zero trust. Can you tell us more about what that means? And this one is to Torsten.
Sure. Zero trust is basically a framework that has been around for some time, more than a decade. It was initially developed by Forrester Research in collaboration with the National Institute for Standards and Technology. Analyst at this time, John Kinnevac, was really very much focused on coming up with a micro-segmentation strategy, which was very much focused on network. He's nowadays working for Palo Alto Networks. One of his peers over at Forrester just 2 years ago has picked up on that thought process, but extended that framework a little bit further to be more aligned with what we're facing today. It's no longer core network that we're dealing with as the potential attack surface, but really people, meaning identities, workloads, devices. All of these things need to be taken into account, and zero trust basically assumes that bad actors, threat actors already exist in your network environment, be it on-premise or if you operate in the cloud, they're already there. And if that's the case, then you basically, before allowing somebody access to critical resources, you should reestablish trust, establish a confidence level that the right person is accessing these resources. And that's what, in reality, zero trust is all about. It's never trust, but always verify. And that's kind of the mantra behind it.
Harry, did you want to add anything to that?
No, so yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's just aligning. So with any kind of access modeling and just-in-time provisioning or these kind of workflows, there's always I just wanted to add there's a bit of business complexity when you take away access. So even when you're delivering like a zero trust type of model, it's really, and this is what I mentioned on the last point, it's really working with your architecture teams and really defining, who needs access to what and kind of drilling that down. And if we look at like domain principles, we know that, when you look at trying to reduce least privilege on like domains and those kind of environments, it's really difficult to do so, right? And that's when the ACLs that a vaulting type solution or suite brings into play really allows you to play on both sides. So either you can correct the problem and refine it within your PAM tool and your PAM strategy, or you can then go in and massage it a little bit on your domain side, fix that access level, and then strategically move it into your PAM program. It's really what side you want to actually leverage it more on. But it's definitely a program, and it's a different fit for every organization.
Okay, great. And then I have another question for both of you. You both referenced MFA as a best practice. I read about MFA being compromised. Is that still an effective deterrent?
So yes, it is. So in September of 2019, the FBI issued a private industry notification warning businesses that threat actors were circumventing MFA through common social engineering and technical attacks. That triggered an entire media spree where it was talked about the demise of MFA. But even the FBI in their notes stated that MFA is still a very effective deterrent. The fact here was that there were some cases where people were able to get a hold of a one-time password token that was sent via SMS. And so there are interception methods that attackers are using, which is called SIM swapping. or port out scams. And in those cases, they were able to get a hold of those one-time passwords. But if you follow guidelines, NIST for quite some time, for instance, is recommending not to use any longer SMS as your MFA methodology. So you should be still fine. Microsoft, quite frankly, did a study, and the times where MFA is being compromised is statistically irrelevant, meaning 0.0.0.1% of all cases where this occurs. And I was just at an event with a Red Hat team member that I know from my past, and for them, when they get hired by organizations to kind of try to break into their network environment, for him, he was telling everyone the biggest deterrent is still MFA, because we have to understand you're typically hacker. They want to do something quick. They're not spending much time on each of their victims. They want to get in and out very quickly, and that's why they take advantage of our human fallibility. But if it takes more effort, they're moving on to their next potential victim. And so don't get distracted by some of the headlines that are out there. MFA is still very, very effective, especially if you would apply something like a YubiKey or Titan Google key that is hardware-based.
Thanks, Torsten. Harry, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. So, I agree with what Torsten's saying. That's, we've typically seen these MFAs been around a long time. We've typically seen older deprecated protocols kind of being susceptible to attack and exploited by exploits because they're using legacy protocols and applications. But in the mainstay, it's the best security principle that you have because it's verifying your trust. And with MFA, it's a little bit better than 2FA because it can do multi-stages of trust authentication against your account. So you could have, biometrics, you could use push to email. There's a whole bunch of facial recognition. There's so many different types of MFA that you can employ. Certain organizations use more than one, but it is still the best way to thwart attacks and risk to your accounts.
And probably to add to that, in the past there was this user concern that, you're putting barriers up, and every time I'm logging in somewhere, I have to authenticate myself, and it's cumbersome, and that's why they really didn't like to adopt it. But nowadays, we all carry a smartphone around with us, and so today's technology allow me to basically use my smartphone as the authenticator. And so with a simple click of a button, within seconds, I'm in. There's no longer the copy and pasting of that one-time password over to another interface. So things have gotten very easy, and I think that has helped increase adoption. I think the latest number I saw from Javelin is that more than 60% of organizations, meanwhile, have implemented MFA in their organization, which is very good news.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Okay, so I think we have probably time for one more question, and I'll pose this to Harry. Any insights on how dominant privileged access abuse is today?
It is predominant. So currently, companies that are just starting their PAM program, there's we're seeing now smaller to medium-sized businesses now, as they're moving through, their business life cycles, and as they're trying to adopt and grow and continue growing, we've noticed that there's quite a bit of risk to their businesses, and there's a lot of it coming from their endpoints. So it usually starts off somewhere on the outside of their network. So it's usually coming in from their laptops and those kind of things. And once they start to infiltrate and move through that way using phishing type attacks and moving toward the network is where we've noticed that there's like a big mainstay in trying to put agents and endpoints on certain devices. And then as well, coming back to the MFA point, a lot of organizations, smaller ones, aren't even using like publicly available authenticators, right? Like Google or something that would provide even to just attest to their identities. They're still using just regular username or password, right? So we have seen increases in this. It's just shifting. The bigger organizations are continuing to roll things out and get better and expand. But we've noticed that a lot more mid-sized to mid-tier customers have been really jumping on board because they've been either hit by breaches or their security teams have done like a red team exercise, and they've understood now that their organization and the way that things were inherently built, and this is with access control is where we're seeing a lot of it, is with the access control modeling that they're doing versus Active Directory that was built 5 years ago, and it's just been upgraded over time compared to, hey, if we're going to design something and put it in now, how do we build security principles and security around like a PAM program when it comes to managing these kind of credentials is where we're seeing a lot of rework.
Great. Torsten, did you want to add any final comments on that question?
I mean, there are stats out there, and probably one of the best is Forrester Research estimates that 80% of today's data breaches are tied to privileged access credentials, either weak, stolen, or otherwise compromised. So in reality, we always have this picture in mind of this hacker sitting in a dark room or even a legion of people, most sophisticated code. Hackers no longer hack in, they log in. I can go to the dark web right now, I spend $200, I get a few thousand username and passwords, and I will conduct a password spraying campaign, and the likelihood that I break into a network is very high. And that's really what cyber attackers are leveraging. The easiest way for them to gain access to sensitive data is really by compromising an end user's identity. And things really get even worse if the stolen identity belongs to a privileged user, because they have broad access and it's kind of, they have the keys to the kingdom. And so once they leverage this trusted identity, they can operate undetected, exfiltrate sensitive data, and never really raise any red flags. And that's why it's not surprising that, for instance, Gartner for the last 2 years in a row has recommended to look at privileged access management as one of your top priority projects. And that's why up to recently they saw that the spending for PAM has picked up. It's the third biggest spending sector within cybersecurity. So that's, for me, a clear argument that if you haven't done yet, you should really look at covering your tracks there.
All right. Well, great. Thank you so much both for answering those questions. And it looks like we're about out of time now. So I would encourage you guys to continue the conversation, though. Feel free to reach out to us. Again, you can find the details in the control panel. And thank you for everyone joining today's webinar. And thanks to Torsten and Harry. We appreciate you being here. So everybody have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you later. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.